Chapter 32 Chandra. The news arrived during the deep quiet of the night, when Chandra was bedding his wife. One of his guards interrupted reluctantly, bowing and keeping his eyes resolutely lowered for all that a painted screen and heavy curtain of silk protected Chandra and his new wife's modesty. "Messengers bring news of the war, Emperor," the guard said. "News of your sister." He emerged from his bed and listened to the messenger through the screen as his servants dressed him, a turban of stiff brocade pinned in place with a moonstone the size of a child's fist, a necklace of prayer stones, each stone wrought from gold and silver intertwined and carved with the name of a mother of flame, an achkan in white silk, and a dhoti of pale gold. His father, he remembered, had never dressed so formally and lavishly in his own bedroom. The advisers aloud in his inner chambers often saw him more at ease, in simple cotton and silks, rich and subtle. Chandra had always despised the informality. It was the place of the emperor to be more than the men who had vowed to serve him, in nature, in purpose, in clothing. Ever since his rise to the throne, he had made a point of not following his father's lackluster example. He was glad of his choice now. The armor of it reminded him of who he was, of the life that the mothers had ensured for him. The crown his righteousness and purpose had granted him. His armor allowed him to reign in his own fury. When the messenger stammered through his news, gathered from Chandra's own spies and soldiers at outposts, and loyal priests who had fled Saketa and imprisonment in Emalini's camp to bring Chandra dire tidings. His sister still lived. His sister still ruled her horde of traitors and dishonorable vow-breakers. His sister had not been killed by his holy fire. The High Prince's fort lay under siege. The High Prince would not have his easy victory Chandra had promised him. Even when blessed fire had been sent to kill her, even when her followers should have finally turned on her and recognized Chandra's true and only claim to power, his sister had survived. His sister still led her fool men. His sister was coming to Parijat. He ordered one guard to summon Hemanth and dismissed the rest. In the silence that followed, he strode over to his balcony, pushing aside the gauze that kept insects at bay, and stepped out into the cool night air. From here he could see the same vista his father once had, and all the emperors that came before them. The vastness of the Mahal itself, with smaller manses nestled within it, and dozens of intimate courtyards full of needle-flower and jasmine, growing in lush profusion. The gardens of his mother, now nothing but blackness and the faint pulsing glow of dying embers, starlight in soil beneath him. The Mahal's walls, a gleaming length of white, and the city of Harshingar beyond it, its white marble and sandstone both golden and blue-tinged beneath the light of the moon. He stared out fixedly, unblinking, until his eyes burned from the gentle nighttime wind and the sting of ash it carried. There were no winds without ash. Not in his Mahal. The guard returned. "Join me on the balcony, priest," Chandra called. After a moment, Hemanth did. "You have had ill news," the priest said cautiously. "Have you heard?" Chandra said. "No, of course you have not. My sister is coming home, priest. You have your wish after all." "My wish," Hemanth said, "is for your well-being, and Parijatvipa's, as it always has been." He drew closer and placed himself next to Chandra on the edge of the balcony. Chandra could feel Hemanth's eyes on him, could feel their concern. "She comes with an army." "Yes," Chandra ground his teeth. It made his jaw ache, pulsing with his tension, his anger. All those fools who want more than they deserve. Don't they understand their place, their purpose in the world? Divyanshi built for them. Don't answer me." He gave a laugh, bitter and afraid. "I know they do not, or they would bow to me, serve me, and be glad." Hemanth was silent for a long moment. Then he said comfortingly, "Be glad that she is coming here. Consider it a sign. The mothers are sending her where she must be, so that she may finally fulfill her duty to you, and to all of us." If the mothers were truly acting in my favor, Chandra thought, Then they would have killed her at the High Prince's fort. They would have ensured that the blessed fire razed her entire army. He felt instantly ashamed of the thought. The mothers were not at fault, nor was Chandra. No, it was his sister. Her monstrous choices, her utter refusal to accept her fate. His sister was a curse. She always had been. Emperor, Hemant said, his voice breaking the quiet that had settled over them both. What will you do? Will you greet her? Speak with her? I would rather drive a dagger through her heart, said Chandra. I would rather shoot her with an arrow through the leg and watch her slowly bleed to death. I would rather strangle her with my own bare hands. She has caused you great pain, Hemant said compassionately. Chandra's eyes closed. He nodded. Yes, she had. He was glad Hemant understood, glad that the high priest had always seen the heart in him that lay under his rage, his unyielding desire for a better world, for better people. You know I will request this of you again, Hemant said, placing a kindly hand on Chandra's arm. Please, Emperor, think of the power of her willing death. Think of the power I already have, Chandra retorted. Do not hold yourself back from greatness, Hemant said. Do not hold Parijatvipa back from greatness. I know you have the capacity to help her willingly and gladly meet her own fate. But do I have the will to see her meet it? Chandra thought. He was not sure he did. He was not sure she deserved it. You're a good man, Chandra, Hemant said, finally using Chandra's name, a thing he did only rarely, in moments when he wanted to speak to Chandra with great intimacy, tenderness. The best of men. Guide her. Teach her what she must be. Let your priests help you, he pressed on. The mothers have sent her to you. Listen to them. Chandra hated his sister, hated her. Had he not said enough? Was he not the emperor? This was his decision as the chosen of the Mothers of Flame, no one else's, not even the high priest's. He turned his face away from Hemant. Emperor, Hemant said, voice soft, please, will you not hear me? Chandra said nothing. I have been reluctant to speak of this, Emperor, said Hemant, when Chandra refused to answer. But there may be a greater danger to Parijatvipa than the weapons of mortal men alone. Chandra laughed abruptly, the noise forcing its way through his teeth. Men are enough trouble. Emperor, he said, sighed. The hour is late, and your heart is troubled. Come to the temple tomorrow. We will pray together, you and I. A new supply of flowers will be brought to my priests. We will make a garland for Divyanshi together. I will put aside the finest roses and marigolds for you. And then we will speak, and I will tell you what fears my priests have brought to me. If you are simply going to attempt to convince me again of my sister's fate, there is no need, Chandra said, half tiredness, half warning. I understand your perspective, and you have made clear to me that you believe wholeheartedly in me, that you will follow my will. As a priest, as your priest, it is my duty to tell you all I can to guide you, to light the path before you. Hemant said with the chiding care of a father. Tomorrow, Emperor. Then do with the information what you will. The high priest departed. Chandra returned to his chamber. His wife was standing by the edge of the bed, still adjusting the pleat of her sari. Her hair was loose over her shoulder. He watched her small fingers tuck the fabric into place, watched the line of concentration etched into her brow. She slowed when she saw him looking and gave him a nervous glance from under her lashes. She was timid, his wife. Her flinching obedience irritated him, but he could tolerate it. She was pretty enough and did not complain or attempt to manipulate when she was called to his bed. She fulfilled her role. What more could he reasonably ask of her? Showing her his irritation by word or violence would be satisfying as breaking the wing of a drab-feathered songbird. And yet, right at that moment, he thought of breaking something beyond repair sounded very pleasant indeed. He thought of the bones of her wrists and lower arms. He watched her delicate fingers work, then go still. He banished his thoughts and his anger. He wouldn't hurt her. That wasn't the kind of man he was. "Go," he said to her abruptly. "Leave me." She gave him a quick look, then lowered her gaze and said, "Sleep well, husband," and swiftly departed. He did not sleep after that. He summoned his military officials, who arrived tired-eyed and disheveled, but obediently set to work discussing what must be done next. In the vast hall of the imperial mahal, where his priests and priestly warriors kept a pit of blessed fire, mother's fire, burning, his loyal officials and lords advised him. Once this hall had been full of lords and princes and kings from across Parijatvipa, Alorins, Shrungani, Saketans, Dwarali, all of them full of hubris, all of them leading the empire and his father astray. Now nearly all the faces before him were Parijati. The Parijatvipans from other city-states who remained were clever enough to recognize their correct place. In service to him, in obedience to him. They knew better than to consider themselves his equal. He had thought briefly of adding Prince Kunal to that number. The man would bow, he knew, lower his head, show obedience. But there was something about the high priest's son that he did not trust. Kind of flinty, hunted anger in the man's eyes that told him Prince Kunal did not deserve the privilege of belonging to Chandra's inner circle. Besides, Prince Kunal's loyalty was contingent on the success of his father against Malini, on the protection of the flames Chandra had gifted him, the power, on the lifeline too that Chandra had extended, food from Parijat, from its safe and fertile fields, untouched by the blight that had ruined both Ahiranya and Saketa. Contingent loyalty did not interest Chandra. He wanted men of faith. He wanted men who placed their faith in him. The high priest had taught Chandra that the mothers of flame loved him, that they spoke to him above all else, guiding him toward his fate. And he heard a loving whisper of them in the arch and flicker of the pit of fire, which bloomed blue for a moment against feathers of gold, as an old and seasoned lord explained to Chandra, in a gruff but respectful tone, that the princess would surely not follow the vast main road to Harshingar. "Her forces are depleted, Emperor," he said, as two priestly warriors quietly entered the room with a cask, opened it, and lowered more magical flame into the pit, which flared and brightened. "She will use caution. If your loyal men locate her, destroy her forces en route. The High Prince's forces will attack her own from behind," said another lord. "He will not simply allow the traitor princess to march on Parijat. His fort remains under siege." A quiet voice interrupted, a military advisor. "He cannot follow easily or immediately." Chandra listened as they debated. His priestly warriors now arrayed around him. One leaned forward, said in a low voice, "Lord Shushant wishes to speak with you, Emperor, in privacy." "He can wait," Chandra said dismissively. "Emperor," the man said, "he insists that he cannot." He was greatly distressed. "Fine," Chandra snapped. "Continue," he told his advisors, who had paused when he raised his voice. "I'll return in a moment." If Shushant had summoned him on a fool's errand, he'd simply have the man's throat cut. That was a fitting price, surely, for wasting any emperor's time. Shushant was from an ancient Parijat family that had lost its glory and wealth long ago. It was Chandra who had raised him and his kin up, who had granted him the wealth of executed traitor highborn and allowed him access to the inner court. Shushant was, as a result, an adoring and faultlessly loyal follower who had brought his lifetime of experience tending to the family rural estate to the task of overseeing Parijat's agriculture. Despite the coolness of the dawn air, he was sweating, his mustache visibly damp. He bowed deeply when Chandra approached, then raised his head. "Emperor, thank you for agreeing to meet me alone." "You think yourself valuable to me, Shushant. To demand my time in this manner, as if I am your servant." Shushant bowed hurriedly. Forgive me," he babbled. "But my men, farmers on a nearby estate, you must see." The lord opened a sack that lay at his feet, drew it wide open, and Chandra looked within and abruptly recoiled. "What?" he said sharply, is that? Shushant's hand trembled as he drew the sack abruptly shut. Rot, Emperor, he said. The rot from Ahiranya. The rot that blights Saketa. It is in Parijat. I do not know how far it has spread. A greater danger to Parijat than mortal men alone, Hemant had said, and here it was before him. Rot in his own fields, his own country. He felt abruptly sick. This was not meant to happen to Parijat, not the land of the mothers, not the land blessed by his rule. And what must I do? He asked. Emperor, Shushant said, I don't know. I do not know. Come with me, he said roughly. He returned to his advisers. They bowed as he entered, waited until he gave them permission to rise. Speak, he said sharply. One of them flinched visibly. Tell me what you've planned. We believe she may cross the very river, said one of his advisers. There is a ford. If we meet her there, we may be able to thin her forces. Thin, Chandra repeated. I don't want her forces thinned. I want them destroyed. Do you understand? Silence from his advisers. They did not seem to want to look at him. Somehow this was his sister's fault. Somehow the curse of her had cursed his land in turn. She did not deserve to burn. She did not deserve to rise. She only deserved pain, only deserved nothing, to be nothing. Emperor, said Shushant. All eyes turned to him. My people are from the land surrounding the Very, and I may be able to suggest a way to meet her and defeat her. Shushant began to speak, and Chandra, pain a lance behind his eyes and through his heart, listened with clenched fists. He wished he could place his hands around his sister's throat. The sick fear that had coursed through him at the sight of the rot-riven crops had alchemized into a rage so encompassing that his only choice was to unleash it. It was what his sister deserved. Tomorrow he would let Hemant talk to him. He would let Hemant tell him of the rot in Parijat, for surely that was what the high priest wanted to speak of. And then he would trust the knowledge of the mothers had surely placed directly in his heart. I am the answer, not my sister. Never my sister. He would send his men to the Very, all the men he could afford, and he would crush her, obliterate her. She did not deserve to burn, to rise. No, the only thing Malini deserved was to die. Chandra went to the temple long after dawn. He went and saw Hemant approach smiling to greet him. He watched Hemant's smile fade at the sight of Chandra's face. Emperor, he said. High priest, Chandra said in response. Tell me what threat faces me beyond mortal men. Tell me what you've been hiding from me. Chandra flung the sack to the ground. Rot-riven flowers tumbled out, the stench of flesh and decay filling the air. The high priest did not flinch back. He looked at the flowers, then raised his face to meet Chandra's eyes. He looked like he had always known this would come. Ah, Emperor, he said sorrowfully, this is not even the smallest part of what I fear.